The cafe was always full in the mornings. People rushed in and out with tired eyes, clutching cups of coffee and talking quickly before heading to work. No one paid attention to the quiet man who entered with a little boy in a wheelchair. The man wore a neat suit, his shoes polished and his face clean-shaven, but his eyes carried a heaviness that wealth could not hide. He was a billionaire, though no one in the cafe recognized him at first glance. To the world outside, he was powerful and untouchable, a man whose name was printed in magazines and spoken about in boardrooms. But inside, he was only a father. And at that moment, a very tired one. The boy in the chair looked around shyly, his hands trembling as he tried to lift a spoon from the table. His father bent down, trying to help, but his movements were stiff, almost hesitant. The boy struggled, spilling a little of the food, and some people in the cafe frowned, not out of sympathy, but annoyance. A few whispered to each other, thinking the child was a burden, or worse, that the father was careless. But the man ignored the stares. He had learned long ago that money could buy mansions and cars, but never silence, the cruelty in people's eyes. He adjusted his son's blanket and pushed the chair closer to the table. He wanted his boy to feel normal, to eat like everyone else. But even that simple act was full of struggle. He gently whispered encouragement, his voice softer than anyone in the cafe had ever heard from a man so rich and feared in business. But here, he wasn't the billionaire who owned buildings and companies. He was just a father watching his son fight with a spoon, and it broke him more than any business failure ever could. His mind wandered back to nights spent in large, empty mansions where silence echoed against marble floors. Servants came and went, but none stayed close. Friends smiled at his wealth, but never cared for his pain. His wife, the boy's mother, had left years ago, unable to bear the weight of raising a child who would never walk like others. So it was him and his son now, always him and his son. He carried the boy through airports, through meetings, through long days that stretched into longer nights. He could close million-dollar deals, but couldn't stop his son's trembling hand from dropping his spoon. And in that cafe, he felt more powerless than ever. The boy's eyes lifted toward him, full of trust, even though his body betrayed him. That trust cut through the father's heart. He tried to smile, but it was forced, fragile, like glass ready to break. He wished he could give his son a normal childhood, a simple day without pain, without stares, without people whispering. But all he could give was his presence, his voice telling him it was okay. Even when it didn't feel okay, the noise of the cafe seemed distant compared to the quiet storm inside him. Every clink of a spoon, every laugh of other children at nearby tables reminded him of what his boy could never have. And yet, he never let the boy see his sadness. He always stood tall in the world, but in moments like this, with his son struggling. Beside him, the cracks showed. Some people looked away quickly, pretending not to notice because facing another's pain made them uncomfortable. Others stared too long, as if the boy's weakness was something to gossip about. The father had seen these reactions many times. He hated them, but he stayed calm. He told himself his son's smile, rare as it was, mattered more than the cruel world outside. Inside, though, he was breaking. He wondered if all his wealth had any meaning. He could buy the cafe if he wanted. He could buy the building, the entire street. But he couldn't buy health for his boy, and he couldn't buy kindness from strangers. That truth weighed heavier on his shoulders than all the responsibilities of his empire. When the boy dropped the spoon again, a small sound of frustration escaped his lips. The father quickly bent to pick it up, his hands trembling slightly. He wanted to help, but he didn't want to take away his son's chance to try. It was always a balance between helping and letting him struggle, and it hurt to choose either way. The boy looked at his father with tired eyes, and the man whispered gently, "It's okay, try again." His voice cracked, but he forced strength into it. No one else in the cafe knew who he was. No one knew that the richest man in the city was standing there, praying his son could lift a spoon. For years, he had carried the title of billionaire like a shield, but in this cafe, he was exposed. People didn't see his power, they only saw his son's weakness. And maybe that was why he came to places like this, not to be seen as a man of wealth, but simply as a father. Yet even in these small escapes, the struggle never left him. The room smelled of coffee and fresh bread, but all he felt was the weight of being alone in his battle. His world was built on contracts, numbers, and profit, but none of those things mattered when he looked at his boy. The only wealth he longed for was his son's happiness, and as he stood there, silent and weary, the thought returned again and again. He could buy everything but peace. He could own the world but never heal the one person who meant more to him than the world itself. That was his silent struggle, the one he carried every day. Invisible to the crowd but louder than any noise in the cafe. The cafe grew louder as more people rushed in, holding briefcases, tapping on phones, ordering in hurried voices. But in the corner, the boy still struggled with his food, and the father still sat silently beside him, his face heavy with worry. No one paid much attention. Most people preferred not to look, pretending they didn't see the child's trembling hands, or the father's quiet attempts to encourage him. Except for one person. The waitress had been watching out of the corner of her eye since the moment they came in. She was young, her hair tied back, her apron slightly wrinkled from the morning rush, but her smile never faded as she carried trays from one table to another. She had seen all kinds of customers: impatient businessmen, families with noisy children, tired students with empty wallets, but something about this father and son pulled her attention again and again. When she noticed the boy trying to lift the spoon, his small fingers shaking, her heart tightened. She could see the father's struggle too, the way he wanted to help, but also wanted his son to feel independent. It wasn't pity she felt, it was something deeper. A simple kindness, an instinct to step in where no one else dared. On her way past their table, she slowed down and bent slightly. Her voice was soft, gentle enough not to embarrass them. "Would you like me to help?" she asked, looking at the boy first instead of the father. The boy blinked at her, surprised that someone spoke directly to him. He gave the smallest nod, and she smiled warmly. She placed the tray she was carrying on a nearby counter and knelt beside the boy. Carefully, she took the spoon, scooped some food, and held it out. "Here you go," she whispered, as if it were a secret between the two of them. The boy's lips curved into a tiny smile, and he opened his mouth to take the bite. His eyes brightened instantly, and for the first time that morning, he looked happy. The father froze. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He simply watched. There was something different about this waitress. She didn't show hesitation, didn't wear that awkward mask people usually wore when they saw his son. She wasn't trying to impress him, nor did she seem to care who he was. All her attention was on the boy, and the way she handled him, with patience, with respect, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. The boy giggled softly after another bite, and the sound caught the father off guard. His son's laugh was rare, fragile like glass, and hearing it made his chest ache. He looked at the waitress again. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't treating it like a duty. She was enjoying it too, talking softly to the boy, asking him if the food was tasty, praising him for being brave. Other customers glanced over, some shaking their heads as if the waitress was wasting time when more tables needed service. But she didn't care. She stayed, feeding the boy slowly, making him smile with every spoonful. The father leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. He wondered why a stranger would care so much. He had hired the best nurses, therapists, and caretakers money could buy, but even they often treated his son like a patient, not a child. Yet here was a young woman with no obligation, showing more kindness in a few minutes than many professionals had shown in years. When the boy finished eating, The waitress wiped his mouth gently with a napkin, then stood up with that same warm smile. "You're very strong," she told him softly before turning back to her work. The boy beamed. The father's heart swelled, though his face remained calm. For the first time in a long time, he felt something shift. It was as if someone had reached into the loneliness he carried and reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. As she walked away, the billionaire father's gaze followed her. He wondered about her story. Why was she working in a small cafe, running around all day, when she had such a heart? There was something different about her, something real in a world where most people only pretended to care. He sat there quietly, one hand on his son's shoulder, but his mind was already turning. He had seen thousands of people in his life, people chasing wealth, power, and recognition. But it was rare, almost impossible, to see someone who chose kindness when no one was watching. The boy tugged at his sleeve, pointing at the waitress, as she carried another tray across the cafe. His eyes sparkled with something new, a kind of light that hadn't been there before. The father glanced at his son, Tej. The cafe had started to quiet down after the morning rush. The clinking of cups softened, and the smell of coffee lingered in the air. The billionaire father sat with his son, still thinking about what had just happened. That simple moment watching the waitress kneel and help his boy eat had left a mark on him. He had seen people spend fortunes to look good in public, but this young woman had shown kindness without any reason, without expecting anything back. His son leaned against him now, looking more relaxed than before. The boy's small smile hadn't faded, and the father kept glancing at it, almost as if he was afraid it would disappear. That smile was a gift one he rarely saw, and he knew who had brought it out, the waitress. When she finally came back to check on their table, her smile was the same as before, bright, warm, and without any trace of judgment. She didn't treat them like they were different. She didn't look at the boy with pity. She treated them like normal customers. That small detail touched the father deeply. Did everything taste all right? She asked kindly, her eyes moving first to the boy. The father noticed that again, how she gave his son respect by speaking to him directly, not just to the adult. The boy gave a shy nod, his voice soft but clear. It was good. The father's throat tightened. His son rarely answered strangers, often too shy or too used to being ignored. But here he was, speaking, even smiling. The waitress grinned. "I'm glad. You did such a great job eating." She winked at the boy, and he laughed quietly, hiding his face against his father's arm. The father couldn't hold back anymore. He cleared his throat softly and spoke, his voice deep but gentle. "Thank you for helping him. Most people don't take the time." The waitress glanced at him, surprised. "Oh, you don't have to thank me," she said quickly, shaking her head. "He just needed a little help, that's all." Her words were simple, but they hit him hard. For her, it was nothing. For him, it was everything. You treated him like he mattered, the father said after a pause. His eyes were steady on her. Not everyone does. The waitress didn't know what to say to that. She gave a small smile, but there was sadness behind it. "Everyone matters," she whispered, almost as if she was speaking to herself more than to him. The father tilted his head slightly, curious. There was more behind her words, something hidden, something personal. He had learned to read people. Decades of business had taught him how, but this wasn't business. This was different. The waitress adjusted her apron nervously. I grew up taking care of someone too. My mother, she got sick when I was still in school. People would stare at her, sometimes even laugh. I hated it." She sighed and shrugged lightly. "So when I see someone who just needs a little patience, I don't look away. I can't." The cafe around them seemed to fade for a moment. Her honesty hung in the air, simple but powerful. The father found himself studying her, not as a waitress, not as a stranger, but as a human being who understood pain and responsibility. "You work here full-time?" he asked. She nodded. "Sometimes double shifts. I need the money. Medicine isn't cheap." She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "But that's life, right? You do what you have to." Her words hit him harder than she knew. Here she was, working long hours, carrying her own burdens, and yet she still had the heart to help a stranger's child. He felt a strange mix of respect and guilt. Respect for her strength. Guilt that even with all his wealth, he couldn't give his son the happiness this woman had brought in a single morning. He didn't reveal who he was. Not yet, he didn't want her kindness to change into something else. He wanted to see her for who she truly was, and so far, she was someone rare. The boy tugged lightly on her sleeve, surprising both of them. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked, his small voice filled with hope. The waitress crouched down again, her smile softening. "Yes," she promised. "I'll be here. And I'll check on you again, okay?" The boy nodded, satisfied, and the father felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he looked forward to tomorrow. As the waitress walked away to another table, the father leaned back in his chair. He wasn't sure yet what role this young woman would play in their lives, but one thing was certain. She had already left an imprint on both him and his son. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, the cafe was just as busy. People hurried in with the same tired faces, ordering the same drinks, rushing to the same jobs. But for one table near the corner, something was different. The billionaire father sat quietly with his son again, but this time there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. His son kept glancing toward the door, waiting. The waitress didn't know it, but her promise from yesterday meant everything to the boy and the father. He wanted to see if she would keep it. In his world, promises were broken as easily as contracts. He had seen men in expensive suits smile while planning betrayal. He had seen friends disappear when fortunes turned. But he wanted to know if this young woman, this ordinary waitress, was truly as genuine as she seemed. When she finally appeared from the back, carrying a tray of mugs, the boy's face lit up. The father saw it immediately and felt a small, rare warmth spread through him. She hadn't lied. She was here, and she smiled as soon as her eyes landed on them. She walked over without hesitation. "Good morning," she greeted cheerfully, bending down toward the boy. "I told you I'd be here." The boy nodded shyly, and the father leaned back, silently observing. He wasn't just watching how she treated his son, he was watching how she treated everyone. He noticed her with a grumpy businessman who complained his coffee wasn't hot enough. She didn't roll her eyes or argue. Instead, she apologized kindly, took the cup, and brought it back steaming, all while keeping her smile. He saw her with a young mother struggling to calm her baby. The waitress gently offered to warm up the mother's bottle of milk while she sat down, giving her a moment to breathe. And when a homeless man peeked in through the door, shivering, the waitress slipped outside quietly with a paper cup of hot coffee and handed it to him with no fuss, no words to draw attention. The billionaire father watched all this, his mind racing. Was it possible someone could be this consistent? So many people changed their face depending on who was watching. But this woman treated everyone the same, with respect, patience, and dignity. He tested her in small ways without her realizing. He ordered something simple, but asked for it with an unusual twist. She didn't complain. She made sure it was done right. Later, he let his son spill some juice by accident, waiting to see if she would show annoyance. Instead, she laughed softly, grabbed a towel, and told the boy, "That's okay. I spill things all the time too." The boy smiled, and the father's chest tightened. As the hours passed, he noticed something else. The waitress was tired. Her eyes had dark circles, her steps were heavy, but she never let her exhaustion touch the way she treated people. She still smiled at every customer, still knelt beside his son when she brought food, still spoke as though he were the most important person in the room. The father thought about all the people he had in his world: business partners, investors, socialites. They smiled at him, but their smiles were sharp, full of hidden motives. This waitress had nothing to gain from him. She didn't even know who he was. To her, he was just another customer, and his son was just another boy who needed kindness. Boy leaned forward, whispering to his father, "She's nice." "Yes," the father murmured, watching her as she wiped down a nearby table. "She is." In that moment, he felt something he hadn't in years: trust. Not full trust, not yet, but a seed of it. He wanted to know more about her. He wanted to know what made someone like her, someone who gave so freely when she herself had so little. When she returned to their table, she bent toward the boy again. "How are you feeling today?" she asked warmly. The boy grinned, holding up his spoon. Proudly, "I can do it myself today," he said, his voice stronger than yesterday. The waitress clapped her hands softly, as though he had just performed something incredible. "That's amazing. See, I knew you could." The father swallowed hard, his throat tight. No one had ever celebrated his son like that, not with such sincerity. Therapists had applauded progress. Teachers had encouraged effort, but this was pure joy, shared freely. As he looked at her, the father knew this wasn't chance anymore. Meeting her felt like something meant to happen. She wasn't just a kind waitress. She was a test he hadn't realized he was waiting for, and in his heart, he already knew she had passed. The evening rush at the cafe had slowed. The lights inside glowed warmly against the dark street outside, but inside, the tiredness of the day clung to everyone. The billionaire father sat with his son again, finishing their meal. The boy looked happy, more at ease now that the waitress had become a familiar face. She had stopped by their table more than once, talking to him, encouraging him, making him laugh in ways that even surprised the father. But tonight, the father noticed something different. Her smile was there, as always, but it looked weaker, stretched thin across a face that carried exhaustion. Her steps were slower, her shoulders slightly slumped when she thought no one was watching. She still served with patience, still knelt by his son's side, but when she turned away, her eyes betrayed her weariness. The father, trained to notice even the smallest changes in people, grew curious. He knew the look of someone who was carrying too much. He had seen it in his own reflection many times. Later, as the cafe emptied and only a few tables remained, he excused himself and quietly followed her with his eyes. She disappeared into the back room, and through the small crack of the door, he saw her sink into a chair. She pressed her hands against her face, her shoulders shaking slightly. She thought she was alone. The father hesitated. He wasn't the type to intrude on another's private moment. But something about her, the way she had been so strong all day, so kind to his son while hiding her own pain, pulled him toward the truth. He shifted closer, pretending to look at the wall near the door, but his ears caught her voice. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered to herself. Her voice trembled. "Mama's medicine is going up again. Rent is due next week, and I can't even rest without worrying." The father froze, his chest tightening. She wasn't complaining to anyone. She wasn't asking for help. She was just releasing the weight she had been holding all day. And that weight was heavy. A small sob escaped her, and she quickly wiped her face, as if even the walls shouldn't see her break. Then she stood up, tied her apron tighter, and walked back into the cafe with the same tired smile as before. The father turned away quickly, pretending he hadn't seen, but his heart was stirred in a way he hadn't expected. He had known she was kind, patient, and genuine. But now he understood something else. She was also carrying her own battles, silently and bravely. When she came to their table again, she smiled at his son. "Did you enjoy your dinner?" she asked. "Yes." the boy said brightly, showing her his empty plate. "That's wonderful," she replied warmly, though her eyes still held a hidden shadow. The father spoke softly, watching her closely. "You work very hard." She blinked, surprised by his words. "Oh, it's nothing. Just doing my job." But he shook his head slowly. "No, it's more than that." His voice was steady, but inside, he felt something shift. He had seen people pretend to care while carrying nothing. She was the opposite, carrying so much, yet still giving care to others. The boy tugged on the waitress's sleeve, pulling her attention. "Don't be sad," he whispered, his innocent eyes noticing more than she thought. Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard, but then she smiled again and knelt down to him. "I'm not sad," she lied gently. "I'm just tired, that's all." The father's gaze lingered on her, his thoughts heavy. He wanted to ask her more, wanted to know everything, who she was, what her life was like, what battles she fought, when no one was looking. But he stayed silent, letting her walk away to clean another table. As he sat there, his son humming softly beside him, the billionaire felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: guilt. He had all the money in the world, more than he could ever spend. Yet here was a young woman breaking herself to pieces just to keep her mother alive, just to keep her tiny world standing. And she still found the strength to kneel beside a disabled boy and make him feel like the most important child in the cafe. That night, as he wheeled his son out into the cool evening air, he glanced back at the cafe. Through the window, he saw her wiping tables with tired hands, her smile gone now that no customers were looking. He gripped the handles of his son's wheelchair tighter. For the first time in years, his heart was unsettled not by his own problems, but by someone else's pain. He knew then he could not just walk away from this. The next day began like any other in the cafe. The bell above the door jingled as people came and went. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and hurried voices mixed with the clatter of dishes. But for the billionaire father, today felt different. He had carried the memory of the waitresses, hidden tears all night. It stayed with him, haunting him even as he tucked his son into bed. He had wanted to knock on the backroom door, to tell her she wasn't alone, but something held him back. Now, as he wheeled his son into their usual spot, his decision was made. Today, he would no longer remain silent. She had shown him her true heart without knowing he had seen it. And now, it was time he revealed his truth. The boy looked around eagerly, searching for her. When she appeared with her usual warm smile and tired eyes, he lit up, waving a small hand. She hurried over, kneeling as always to greet him first. "Good morning," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm glad to see you again." The father sat quietly, studying her. She was still tired, but she didn't let it touch her kindness. She placed water on the table, then stood to take their order. "The usual?" she asked. "Yes," the father answered, his deep voice calm. But then he added, "And if you have a moment after, I'd like to speak with you." She blinked, surprised, but nodded. "Of course." Later, when the cafe grew quieter, she came to their table. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently. The father leaned forward, his eyes steady on hers. "You've been kind to my son. Kinder than most people ever are. You treat him like he matters, and for that, I owe you more than I can say." She shook her head quickly. "You don't owe me anything. He's a wonderful boy. I only did what anyone should do." "Not anyone," the father replied firmly. "Most people look away. But you didn't. You gave him dignity. And you gave me something I haven't seen in a long time." His laughter. The waitress looked down, embarrassed, not sure how to respond. "I'm just glad he's happy," she whispered. The father hesitated, then spoke again. "You don't know who I am, do you?" She frowned slightly, confused. "You're a customer, a father." He allowed a small smile. "Yes, but I'm also a man who owns half the buildings on this street." I am not just any father. I am a billionaire." Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. She laughed, nervously shaking her head. "No, you're joking." But his gaze remained steady, and slowly she realized he wasn't. Her heart pounded. She thought back to the way he dressed, the quiet confidence in his posture, the way people sometimes glanced at him with curiosity. It all made sense now. "I didn't tell you before," he continued, "because I needed to see who you truly were. And I did." He paused, his voice softening. "You treat people with kindness no matter who they are, even when no one is watching. That is rare." The waitress stood frozen, her mind spinning. A billionaire? She had been helping his son without even knowing. She felt her face heat up, embarrassed by her messy apron, her tired hair, the cracks in her shoes. She suddenly felt too small, too ordinary to stand in front of a man like him. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice low. He leaned forward, his tone firm but kind. "That is why it matters. You weren't kind to impress me. You were kind because it's who you are." Tears pricked her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I only did what was right," she whispered. The boy reached out and tugged her sleeve gently. "You're still my friend, right?" he asked in his small, innocent voice. She knelt down immediately, meeting his eyes. "Of course," she said, her voice steady now. "Nothing changes that." The father watched the moment in silence, his chest tightening. That answer, that simple, honest answer, was all the proof he needed. She wasn't afraid of him, not truly. She was only surprised. But her heart remained the same. For years he had lived in a world where people saw his wealth before they saw him. Every handshake came with expectation, every smile with hidden greed. But here, in a small cafe, a young waitress had treated him and his son as human beings. She had no reason to care, yet she did. And now, she knew the truth. The father leaned back, his decision forming as clearly as the sunlight streaming through the cafe window. This woman had changed something in his life, in his son's life, without even realizing it. And he would not let that go. The waitress stood slowly, still shaken, but the boy's smile calmed her heart. She gave him one last gentle pat on the shoulder before returning to her work. The father watched her walk away, his mind already made up. It was time to change her life, just as she had unknowingly changed his. The next few days at the cafe felt like any other for the customers. But for the waitress, everything had changed. She still wore the same apron, still tied her hair back in the same simple way, still greeted customers with that warm smile. But deep inside, she was shaken. The man she had been helping, feeding, and talking to like any regular guest was a billionaire. She replayed their conversation over and over in her mind. His words, his eyes, the calm way he said, "You weren't kind to impress me. You were kind because it's who you are." She didn't know what to expect next. Maybe he wouldn't return. Maybe he had said his thanks and that was it. She didn't hope for more. That wasn't the kind of life she had ever known. Her world was simple work, care for her sick mother, survive. But he did return. Every morning, just like before, the father and his son came in. He sat in the same place, ordered the same food, spoke the same way. Nothing about his behavior changed. But everything else did. One afternoon, after the cafe had quieted down, a man in a suit walked in. He didn't look like a customer. He approached the waitress at the counter with a polite smile and handed her a sealed envelope. "This is for you," he said, and left without another word. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written in elegant handwriting. Asterisk, to the woman who gave my son dignity. You said you work double shifts to pay for your mother's medicine. I've arranged full medical care for her at a private clinic nearby. All expenses are covered. You no longer need to worry. A small account has also been opened in your name. Please accept this not as charity but as gratitude. Thank you for being who you are. Asterisk at the bottom was his signature. Her hands shook as she read it again and again. Her throat tightened, her eyes burning. She hurried to the back room, away from customers, clutching the letter to her chest as the tears finally came. It was real. That evening, she visited the clinic. Her mother, frail and always in pain, lay in the small apartment bed. The nurse greeted her at the door of the private room and explained gently that everything had been taken care of. Her mother had been moved earlier that day. A specialist had been assigned. All bills were already cleared. The waitress stood there, unable to speak. Her mother, waking slowly from sleep, looked at her with confusion. "What's happening?" she asked softly. And for the first time in years, her daughter could answer with peace in her voice. "It's going to be okay now." The next morning, she returned to work. She didn't know how to act, what to say. She had no words big enough to thank him. But when she saw the billionaire father at the corner table, reading a book while his son giggled over his plate of eggs, she walked over. Quietly, he looked up and gave her a small smile. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, placing a hand over her heart. "You've changed everything for me." He shook his head gently. "No, you changed everything for me. You made my son smile. You showed me kindness without knowing who I was. I only returned what I could." She blinked back tears. "But why? Me? So many people need help. Don't say you're just a waitress," he said softly. "You are a light in a dark place." And I saw it. She stood there for a moment, unsure what to do, then smiled as his son reached out for her hand. She knelt beside him like always, brushing his hair back, whispering a joke that made him giggle again. The father watched with full eyes. His heart, which had been hardened by years of cold business and silent pain, felt warm again. She had not only brought laughter back to his son, she had brought life back to both of them. In the days that followed, more changes came. She received a call from a local charity, offering her a job as a coordinator for a new children's program, something stable, something meaningful. Behind the scenes, the billionaire had recommended her, never telling her it was his doing. The cafe owner, stunned by the attention she suddenly received, gave her paid time off to help her transition. And each evening, the boy's smile waited for her at the same corner table. What started with a spoonful of food had turned into something no one expected. A bond, a rescue, and the beginning of a new life. She had once believed she was invisible to the world. But now, because she dared to care, someone had seen her. Really seen her. And he changed her life forever. The sunlight spilled gently through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow on the familiar corner table where the billionaire father and his son now sat every morning. But today felt different, peaceful, complete. The boy, once shy and tense, now laughed openly as he played with a small toy in his hands. His movements were still slow, but there was joy behind them. His eyes sparkled with a freedom that hadn't been there before. The waitress entered a few minutes later, not in her apron, but in a soft blouse and clean jeans. She no longer worked here. Today, she was only visiting. And yet, her presence still brought warmth into the room. As soon as the boy saw her, he waved excitedly. "You came." She knelt beside him, smiling. "Of course I did. I missed you." The father watched silently, his heart full. It had only been a few weeks since he stepped out of the shadows and revealed who he really was. But in that short time, everything had changed. Not just for her, but for him and his son too. She no longer worked long shifts on her feet all day. She now helped organize programs for children with disabilities, a role she had taken with quiet pride. It allowed her to spend time with her mother, who was finally receiving proper treatment and slowly gaining strength. And every week, she made sure to visit the boy who had unexpectedly changed her life. The father still remembered the night he Told her everything, how he had watched her kindness from the first moment, how her compassion had touched something inside him that money never could. She had listened with wide eyes and a trembling heart. And when he offered to help, not out of pity but out of respect, she didn't ask for more. She had only said, "Thank you for seeing me." Today, he had something more to say. After the boy returned to his seat, happily munching on a small cookie, the father turned to her. "You've done a lot for us," he began, his voice low. "But I think there's more you're meant to do." She tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" He pulled a small folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were papers, plans, budgets, outlines. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning over the contents. "A foundation," he explained. "In your name, to help working women, single mothers, caregivers, people like you, people who work hard but go unseen." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. "I don't understand. You inspired this," he said. "You reminded me that kindness matters more than power. That sometimes the greatest strength is the quiet one that just keeps going, no matter what." He smiled gently. "You gave so much without ever asking for anything. Now I want to give you the chance to do even more for others like you." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him. "I'm not qualified for something like this." "You're more than qualified," he replied. "You have a heart. That's what people need. You know what it means to struggle. You know how to lift others up, even when no one lifts you. That makes you stronger than most." She covered her mouth, trying not to cry in front of him. The boy noticed her tears and reached out, holding her hand. "Don't be sad," he whispered. She laughed softly through the tears. "I'm not sad," she said. "I'm just really, really happy." Later that day, they left the cafe together. The three of them no longer strangers, but something like a family. The boy walked a few steps with help, holding both their hands, his laughter echoing down the street. They passed the corner where she used to sit and cry during breaks, the pharmacy where she once counted coins for her mother's medicine, the alley where she had handed out coffee to the homeless man. But now, everything looked different. She wasn't the tired waitress anymore. She wasn't the girl no one noticed. She was a woman who had changed lives, starting with a spoonful of food and a kind smile, and now her own life was blooming into something she had never dared to dream. The billionaire father, once surrounded by cold walls and silent halls, had found something far more valuable than wealth: a second chance, a new light in his life. A woman who reminded him that love, not money, is what truly saves us. As they walked, the world around them bustled on. But for that moment, for that one quiet, beautiful moment, everything felt still. Everything felt right.